Hi, folks. Welcome back. We've got our next great talk here with Larry Snelly, who has some excellent work that's in the East Hall over there, and he's going to talk to us about digital collage and Photoshop. So,
thank you, Barb. Hi, guys. I'm Lawrence Snelly, and I'm a digital collage artist from Los Angeles, California. And I'm really excited today to take you through some of the steps of creating a digital collage using Photoshop. So first off, what I'm going to talk about is some idea generation ideas. I primarily have been pulling most of my ideas from old printed matter. So, for instance, I love working with old romance comics, preferably from the 1950s, the 1960s, or 1970s. I love old tabloid magazines, especially gossip magazines. I kind of found a treasure trove with Exposed magazine from the 1950s. It's kind of a cheaper knockoff of Confidential and a lot of the celebrity rags that were really prominent in the 1950s and 60s. These are kind of treasure troves for me as far as material and idea generation. Old movie magazines are also a really great topic as far as a place to find, all sorts of interesting old advertisements, old typography, just old imagery. And what I like to do then is I like to go through, and I'm fairly picky about what I want. So I'll go through the magazines and I'll sort of scan through, find things that I want, and mark that page. And then once I've got enough material gathered together, I'll then go ahead and I'll scan it. And I primarily use an Epson scanner. It's a store-bought, regular scanner. It's a printer scanner, actually. It was probably $100, maybe $125 scanner. And what's nice about these new scanners is that they allow you to scan at a very, very high resolution. So for what I'm doing, I want to work fairly large. So I'm scanning most of my materials in at about 800 to 1200 DPI. And so for anybody that has a scanner, you'll notice that you have resolution settings, and you can scan anywhere from 50 DPI up to 3200. It's pretty amazing how high the resolution is now with scanning on just a, desktop scanner. So pretty much most scanners that anybody has will do the job, especially for what we're going to be doing today. We're not going to be working in the high resolution that I normally work at for the demonstration, only because it would take a little too long in processing time with Photoshop. So I have a tendency to work at a lower resolution when I do any sort of demonstration. So that being said, another thing too about scanning, most scanners will allow you to select a D screen. And what that does is it compensates for the dot matrix, or I shouldn't say dot matrix, but the dot printing that was prevalent, with newspapers and magazines, and still is today. You can adjust that D screen depending on the type of material that you're going to be using. So, for instance, newspapers are at a fairly low print quality, so you can scan those in using a D screen of usually it'll have a setting, like it'll say newspaper, and it'll be like a 85 like D screen or something like that. So what I found is the D screen really helps a lot. It helps kind of clean the image up, and you can set it for a newspaper, which is the majority of what I'm using. A lot of these old magazines are of a low sort of newsprint quality. So that sort of newspaper D screen works really well. If you're working on a higher resolution, say a really high magazine or a book scan, you're going to want to set your D screen to be for something like that, which is going to be a higher setting. So anyhow, once you've got your materials scanned in, you are then going to bring them into Photoshop. So if we could go ahead and push my there we go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share you my screen here. And what I've already put together is sort of the basis for a background. And what I've done is I've taken various um, magazine ads, and I have sort of set up a grid using those magazine ads. These are all individual layers in Photoshop. And what I did was I just brought in the scans, selected what I want, brought them into one document, and then started layering the grid as I wanted to set it up. So these are obviously multiple ads from different magazines, all sort of scanned into one layer. And what I like about that is I can pick and choose the ads that I want to have, as opposed to scanning in a whole page of ads and using that. There's a little too much random. There's too many random ads in there that I don't want. Primarily since I'm working in ideas that deal with body imagery and the advertising industry, and how that affects women. I wanted to be really selective about the type of ads that I was going to pick for this background. So as you can see, I am using all sorts of different ads that sort of are pointing out all the things that are wrong with women. And that just is something I guess I've become more sensitive to over the last 10 years or so. But I have real sympathy for women having to sort of deal with this constant body imagery sort of thing that's being thrown at them. So that being said, I have picked these ads very specifically so that they say something when you read them in the background. So once I have my grid set up, what I want to do then is I want to convert this to a smart object. And the reason we're going to do that is that a smart object will allow us to resize this image as much as we want without degrading the original quality of the scan or of the layer. What can happen is when you're working in Photoshop, if you don't set up your imagery or your objects in the beginning to be smart objects, if you continue to enlarge them or minimize them and change the size around, you're going to degrade the quality of the image. It's just the natural thing that happens with Photoshop. However, if you set it to be a smart object, not only will it keep its original integrity, but it will also make for a smaller file size later on, which is really important, especially when you're working in high resolutions like I am. So I've got my grid set up. And so what I've done is, since I like what I have here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. And what I'm saving actually is the smart object. I've already set this file up in ahead of time so that I could just jump in. But what I want to show you here is once that's saved out and saved as a smart object, it then goes into my overall layout and goes back into the overall piece. It's taking a little while because it's a lot of number crunching. There's a lot of number crunching going on because of all these different layers. So we're going to give that just a little bit of time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask those, and I will answer those as I can. All right, so we've gone ahead and we saved this, and now we're going to go into our overall layout. So as you can see, this crops a little differently. It's cropped off some of the bottom. I've set this up to be 8.5 by 11. So this is kind of giving me a nice background to work with. Um, and one of the things I like about the old magazines is some of the interiors will have it will have black ink, but it will have a one color ink. And Exposed magazine had this great red ink that I really love. So when I scanned it in, I was able to just pull the red ink that I liked and make a whole layer out of that. So underneath the ads, I've got this red layer, which is kind of like the base color for everything. So as you can see over here, the smart object has a little bit of an icon. What I did was I duplicated that and then I flattened it so I had just one layer of the ads. So as you can see now, this is the ad layer on top of the red. And this layer, as you can see up here, is set to darken. Now you can try all sorts of different layer effects just by scrolling down. Like, multiply looks pretty cool. Darken works a little bit better for my needs, but there's so many different variations on what you can do then. And that's one of the things that makes Photoshop so much fun is that you can really play around with the different variants. And, say you like this, but you don't want it to be so intense. You can just come over to opacity and you can just drop that down, to whatever you like. And so there's just enormous amounts of play. There's enormous amounts of, ways to change your image very, very quickly. And that's one of the things I like about Photoshop is that you can go as fast as my mind can go as far as changing ideas. So I originally had, I think, this set to darken. So as you can see, you can still read all of this fairly well, which is intentional. I want a lot of this type to be readable so that if somebody sees this and likes it and wants to read more, they can actually read what the ad says. To me, that's really important. This original copy was done for a reason, so I want that to come through because so much of it is really screwed up and really manipulative. And so I think that's really important for the piece. So I've got my background, and again, I can do all sorts of different things with that, but it's a background, and I want it to sit in the background. We're gonna have a main image. So once I've gone through a lot of my scans, and I'll show you some of those right now, so you can kind of get an idea of what those look like. But say, for instance, this is a bucket of scans. So, I've got titles that I really liked and, panels that I really liked. And so let me go back a little bit. But there's quite a variety of different things to pick from. So I want a main image. I want an image that's gonna, be the main draw of the piece. So my Photoshop's running a little slow, so I'll take a little bit of time to get going here. But say, for instance, here we go. This is great right here. All right. Okay, so this was a scan I found from an old gossip magazine. And so, say if I like this figure, I'd probably come over to the quick selection tool and I would start, kind of selecting what I wanted here. So, say I like all that quite a bit. And we're gonna get the top of her crown too. We're get it as good as we can. All right. So there we go. There's a scan right there. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna select that and we're gonna copy it and we're gonna then close it out. And if we wanted to, we can bring it into this piece. And since it's much larger than the piece we're working on, because it's a high resolution scan, I'll need to resize that. And so, whoops. Let me. There we go. So that's how I would take a scan. I would take a scan and quickly bring it over here if that's what I wanted to use. But that's not actually the one I want to use. But I just wanted to show you how to do that. The one I want to use is actually this girl right here. And she just kind of has like the perfect pinup girl qualities, but she's not well known. She's not famous. And that's a good thing, especially when you're working with copyrighted materials and things like that. Um, most of these magazines that I scan from they're so old. They're from the 1950s, 1960s. Most of these companies aren't in business anymore. And so the copyrights on these things have expired a long time ago. You got to be really careful about those sort of things. So I try to use imagery that's not too famous or well known. So anyhow, I brought in this scan. This is what it normally looked like. This was the original. And then what I did was I went ahead and played around with different settings in the beginning just to see what I liked. And the lighten setting was really cool because it kind of gave me all the highlights, but it dropped out the shadows and allowed the advertisements to show through from behind. And so one thing you can do then is once you've got, say, one of you've got your main imagery here, you can then take that and you can duplicate it fairly easily by dragging down and just making a new layer. And then you can start having fun with like double imagery. You can start doing things with opacity, start making sort of ghost imagery. There's so many different things you can do. You can then start changing, the screen, the different types of settings on the layers. But one of the things I did was I then duplicated the layer and then I did a hard light selection on that. And it kind of gave me, what I was looking for as far as really great texture. You can still read a lot of the typography through it, but some of it is obscured, which again doesn't really bother me. But I'm kind of liking that. I'm liking the way that's looking, especially color-wise. We're getting a kind of a nice gradation of color here from sort of orange going into a more of a sort of a tan, like a neutral tan color. So overall, this is really starting to come into something. It's starting to look like an image as opposed to just random pieces thrown together. So one of the things I did with the collage that's up in the gallery is I went ahead and I blacked out the eyes. And I'm not really sure if that's what I want to do on this one, but it's there if I want it, if I don't want it. It could be part of a series. It could be a statement on something or not. The one thing I did want to include, though, was this. And to me, this kind of helps bring the piece full circle. It, again, sort of accentuates some of the idea of what I'm trying to get across. The sort of destructiveness of the advertisements, the destructiveness of the gossip magazines, and maybe the sort of effects that it had on people over the years. I'm not really sure. I shouldn't read into it too much, but yeah, again, there's all these things that you can do and all this variation that you can have with Photoshop. And when you work in a high enough resolution, these things can then be brought over into a print medium and be made fairly large. And one of the hopefully outcomes, or one of the goals here, is that I'd like to eventually be able to take a lot of this work and make it very, very large, like 5, 6 feet tall. And I think that's where a lot of the power will start to resonate with these pieces, is seeing them in a really large format. I think, will be a powerful statement and will make for an interesting piece of artwork. So, let's see what we got here. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to post those, and I'll be happy to answer those. All right, there we go. And one thing to be careful of when you are working in Photoshop is you've got to be mindful of the file sizes. Now, I've gone ahead and I've reduced this to 240, but normally I'm working at 800 to 1200. And some of the problems that I've run into is that the file sizes can get really large and can be somewhat unmanageable. So the more smart objects that you create, the better. I found that the more smart objects that I create within a document, the smaller the file size and the more flexibility it will give me later on. So be aware that if you are working in a high resolution, be sure to keep an eye down here, especially in your file size cache, and make sure that it's not going too high. Once you start getting into like 1.5 gigabytes, be careful, because it may actually be bigger than what it's showing, and Photoshop really can't go over 2 gigs. And a way around that is to save your entire document as a large document format, or a PSB. It's kind of what happens when you make smart objects within a Photoshop document, but you can actually make the entire Photoshop document a PSB, and it will be a much smaller document and much easier to handle. So I am actually getting to the end of my talk here. A few things I was going to mention is printing these sort of things. You always want to work at a fairly decent resolution. So if you're going to do any sort of collage work or any sort of Photoshop work that you want to have printed, you always want to work between 200 and 300 DPI. If you're working exclusively in the web, and you're only going to be doing things for the web, 72 to 150 DPI should be fine. But any sort of print stuff, you're really going to want to try to keep it as close to 300 DPI as you can. That's really going to be your best print quality. And again, when I'm working in a resolution of, say, 800 to 1200 DPI, the reason is I'm compensating for the size. So what happens then is, once I want to then go large, it will hopefully translate to that size without any problem. Hence the reason I'm working at such a high resolution at a much smaller size. I can then res that up to the size that I want, as opposed to the other way around. You can't take a low resolution image and make it big. You can only take a high resolution image and make it big. So the higher the resolution, the bigger you can go on it. And so that is about it.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Larry. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a little early here, but
it's fine.
Yeah. All right.
I did have some questions. Well, I was wondering,
sure.
I personally have been living in Photoshop, working on this gallery for the last however long. How long have you been using Photoshop?
I actually started using Photoshop before there were layers. So I got to work on one of the first versions of Photoshop back in the early 90s.
Wow.
So yeah, I've been working on it a long time. I'm thinking about getting certified by Adobe, but it's on the list.
A little surprised they haven't yet. Yeah, I mean, easy for that one. That's really neat. What are some of the things you think they have done best in making like changes over the line scan? Yeah.
Layers was the most incredible thing to have happen. Before that, everything had to be done in channels, and that could get very, very complicated, because you're dealing with mostly masking, and it's a lot trickier than layers. But I think the other thing was, once the filters came in and once type was at a point where you could actually do fairly decent type in Photoshop, those were some benchmarks. Yeah, without a doubt.
What have they not done that they should have done
well,
so far?
I can't really say, because I've never been in like the development part of, you know, working on the software, but the only complaint I have is that they changed the they keep changing the configurations for the tools, and it's like a really minor thing, but that's like the only complaint I have. I really don't have any complaints, to be honest, because to me it's kind of a miracle, and because I've worked on it for so long, I can do things on it so quickly that I can build an image in no time at all, and then have time to tweak it and whatnot, you know, later. But I can get an image put together in probably under 20 minutes, if not sooner. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, coming from somebody that used to, you know, hand draw, and I still do draw, but hand draw and hand paint things, the time is pretty extraordinary in that you can put together an image in Photoshop in just an extraordinarily quick amount of time, and have it be something that looks pretty decent, you know. I mean, it's amazing how fast it is, and the processing time, I think, is what amazes me, in that I can work with almost a 2 gig file and the machine doesn't crash. Whereas, you know, when I first started, if it was a 10 megabyte file, forget it, you know. So again, it's just this whole, like, it's like seeing it from its infancy to, you know, they're probably, Adobe Photoshop is probably a teenager now, maybe, at this point. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, you know, from here on out.
Yeah, that sounds like it's fascinating to have seen that progression.
But I'll say this: it's absolutely changed my life. Absolutely, it made it possible for me to have a career, you know, beyond traditional, you know, hand drawn sort of work. But also, it was a huge, I don't know, it was like a huge addition to that toolbox of skills, where I could take all the things I learned in, you know, from illustration and whatnot, and apply it to this, and be able to build an image so fast. It was just, it's revolution. It's really revolutionary and really exciting, because I couldn't do that 20 years ago, you know, or, you know, it's just amazing to me, like, how complex it is. Like, as long as I've been working in it, and I've taken a lot of classes, like a lot, there's still things I don't know about it, you know, which is pretty amazing. But it also shows you just how deep it is. And compared to a 3D program, this is nothing, you know. Like 3D stuff is like mind-boggling to me. But Photoshop is pretty, it's pretty doable. But again, I have a lot of experience behind it. That makes a huge difference. It is intimidating to a lot of people coming into it, and rightly so. It's a big boy program, you know. You got to have your chops to really work in Photoshop, and it takes years to really develop the skills that are kind of necessary. But it's worth every minute, because it's the future. It really is. And it was, when I saw it, I was like, I got to learn this, because this is the future. You know, this is everything. And it is. It's the #1 imaging program in the world. You know, I can't imagine what my life would be without Photoshop. So I should become an Adobe spokesperson, I think, is what I should become.
There you go. I was going to say, this is what we've discovered here. Get certified, get them.
I'm really good at shilling for Adobe.
Send you to conferences and be like, Photoshop's the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, you said you've been working on this this theme for like the last 10 years or so about women in the and media and the kind of the
Well,
effects of it, right?
it started when I was working on a Divine art show in 2011, and I put together this show based around Divine, and I started there, but it didn't have the same sort of thing involved because it was just a piece with Divine, but it was really built up on collage. And behind me, like, there's a Terrasatana piece that I'd done not long after the Divine piece. And so that's kind of the beginnings of it. I was doing these really large sort of canvas uh, collage pieces, but the problem is I was using all my materials. I was like, shit, if I keep using all my old magazines, like I'm not going to have anything left. So then I had the idea of doing it digital. And that to me makes more sense because not only can I keep the original materials intact, but I can do anything I want with them. And if I need to, I can go back and get them. But once they're up on a canvas, like that's it. You know, they're up there, and that's okay. I mean, I can still continue to do that sort of work. But I like the idea that like the digital stuff can be put into a print medium pretty easily, you know, like making prints or going really large scale with it. So that's kind of the end. That's kind of the end goal, is to really go big as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And then maybe have, you know, regular size prints, you know, to be affordable. But my end goal is to get these as big as I can. In fact, I'd like to, you know, get these like 6, 7, 8 feet tall if possible. And I'm going to start looking into those sort of print options here. But so far, so good.
Yeah, I'd attend that show.
Oh, thank you
Sounds
very
like
much.
that would be fun.
Well, I'll definitely make sure you know about that whenever it happens.
Great, great, great. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today,
Oh,
being
thank
part
you
of
so
the
much,
show.
Barb. I really appreciated it.
Yeah,
it was a great time.
Awesome.
All
So
right, we'll
for
talk to you
everybody, okay.
All right, thanks again. All right,
Sure.
we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.